Hey guys, this is JD back. Gonna do another video with a game from the Winning Pawn Structures by Alexander Babern. This time we're gonna look at a situation where it's black with the IQP. In the previous two videos, we were looking at situations where there was a pawn on, in this case, on e6, and white uses f-pawn to go down and exchange that pawn so that he could attack f7. This position is a little bit different because instead of having the analogous pawn on e3, white's going to have it on c6. So this time he's going to use pieces directly instead of a pawn advance. So let's get into it. So the opening was a French defense. It is kind of amazing to me how many openings the IQP can come from. There's a Caro-Kann, the Sicilian Alpin, the Queen's Gambit decline accepted, the Slavs, the French defense, of course. There's just so many openings that this comes from that it really needs to be, understanding of this position really needs to be a part of all players' repertoires. Just going through the opening moves relatively quickly here. And then, alright, so here we have reached the IQP position. So if we note, black already has his bishop headed straight towards the f2 pawn. And that note, since there's, as I said before, there's no pawn on e3 here, which makes a piece attack more viable. So we get knight b3, which is going to kick the bishop, and black decides to drop it back to a7, which kind of was one of the points of this early a6 move, to have this square. So what white decides to do is he plays queen d3, and his plan is to play bishop e3 and try to trade off this dark square bishop so that it's not attacking the f2 square anymore. Which, you know, there's nothing that black can do really to stop that plan. It's just that this plan actually turns out to be a little bit slow. So if we look at this position now, after the exchange, white is in exactly the same position, except for he doesn't have the dark square bishop, whereas in that same amount of time, black managed to castle and then play rook e8, which is really just a net gain of 2 tempi here. So it continues on, just a simple development, bishop to e4, or sorry, bishop to g4, attacking this knight, which indirectly influences the d4 square. Really an interesting technique where the light squared bishop fights for a dark square, most commonly by attacking some piece that defends the d4 square. Rook e1, knight c6, c3, and now queen b6. So, really nice move, lining up against really all of the key points in the position. We get the f2 square, which is key, the d4 square, which is key, and then also this b2 square, which is undefended. Really, these are the two weak points in the white camp, plus the strategic strong point of having control of this d4 square, so that he can advance the pawn, or at least keep this diagonal open, so that he can use it for an attack. So bishop f1, Babern says this is kind of a mistake. The white's idea is that he wants to play knight fd4 without trading the bishops. It was probably better to just play knight fd4 immediately and allow the exchange of bishops. I think that I probably would have done that as white, just under the assumption that any time that I can trade pieces when I'm playing against this IQP, I'm probably going to do it. But he chose bishop f1, which allows another really instructive move from black here. He just takes off the knight. So again, this is kind of a little bit against the general practice of the situation when we have the IQP, because we typically want to not trade pieces. But black has a couple points here. The first point is that he has removed this defender of the d4 square, which means that it's going to be harder for black to close that diagonal, which is going to allow this queen to continue exerting pressure down this diagonal. The second point, which is one that Burn makes that I've never really heard before is that when you have the isolated queen pawn and you do have to trade pieces, you should try to trade your bishops away and keep your knights. Which sounds strange because normally people prefer the bishop pair or the bishops over the knight, but he says that knights work better in this kind of a pawn structure, and the reason is he says that they're more flexible. And what he means by that is a knight can quickly jump from defending one square to attacking another square. So, for example, what we're going to see in this game is this knight is presently defending d4 as it needs to be, and at the key moment later we'll be able to jump and attack an entirely different square on a different color complex, and namely here the f2 square, which is not something that any bishop can do. So again, quite instructive, and I don't know if I could have come up with this move on my own or not, but it's definitely an idea I'll be aware of after reviewing this game. So of course we take it, and now a5. So the idea is to kick this knight away and going to attack the b2 square. This maneuver with the a5 or a4 push is especially attractive here, since now black no longer has the d4 square for his knight, because white really just has no control over that square anymore, or at least not as much as black does. So white decides he needs to take actions to stop that plan. I mean, he could play, he could exchange the rooks and then play rook b8, rook b1. I understand why he didn't want to do that. That's kind of a ugly place for the rook, but perhaps this was a better idea than what he chose. So he takes the rooks, and then he plays queen f4. Okay, so the idea is that now if the pawn advances, he's just going to take it. But black has a interesting retort. He just plays a4 anyway. And the point is that this pawn sacrifice, which is not really a sacrifice, is going to deflect the queen away from the king side and allow him to come and attack this f2 square. There's not a whole lot that that white can even really do to stop this plan. If he just plays like knight b4, then just queen's going to take on b2. The rook's going to be hanging, so the rook probably has to play to c1, and then he can just grab this pawn here on a2. Except for if the knight went to d4, we take here. If the queen came back to c1, we could even just could we just trade queens and then take on d4 maybe? Even so, we've won a clean pawn. Either way, if he declines it, so he takes it, and then we get rook e4, knight e4, with tremendous pressure against this f2 pawn. There's no piece on the board that in any way can directly defend it. The pawn is pinned, so it can't jump. So white tries knight to d4, just giving up this b2 pawn. So he gets the b2 pawn. He has to play now knight c2 to protect the to protect the rook. So we jump back, and black goes back to b6. It looks like he probably could have taken that pawn, I think, but he has a bigger game in mind. He's going to go after the f2 pawn. White played bishop d3. There's really no... he can't go back to d4 with the knight, because then just knight takes... here he gets knight takes c3, and the queen doesn't have any squares where it can maintain defense of this knight. It can't go to d1, obviously, and these two squares are taken as well. So he's just going to drop the knight as well as the pawn. So that's clearly not an option. So d3, we get queen takes. So now he's gained a pawn. So he sacrificed a pawn, but has gotten two pawns back in return. So the king goes in the corner, knight c5. His idea is he wants to trade off the defender of the e2 square so that he can play rook e2 and exert more pressure on the king side here. So the queen has to move, we take, and we get this. It looks pretty devastating, actually, because we're threatening both to take on g2 and to take on c2. It looks like that this may be winning on the spot, but there's a clever tactic that White comes up with to not lose any additional material, but in doing so, all the major pieces get traded off the board, and is going to leave Black with quite a nice pawn up knight endgame. So he takes the rook, and then after queen takes, he plays rook e1, which takes advantage of Black's back rank problems. So it seems like the Black should just take the rook, but actually this is another really instructive move in the game. He plays queen e6. I really like this move a lot. The point is that, of course, White has to take the rook, but when he does, notice that this f-pawn, which was not a pass pawn before, is now. He's got a clear pass pawn. d4 is now defended as well. And it's just going to be a simple matter of technique. So I want to go through the rest of the game, perhaps relatively quickly. I think that the way that Black handled this endgame is quite instructive. So king g1, king f7. The first thing he's going to do is just bring his king up to the center of the board. f2, e5. The kings come up, and after here, he plays h5. Which is just gaining space on the king side. He's just going to try to take some space here. He's in no rush to go pushing his pawn into the center of the board. I mean, it's possible that he could win, but this is just too rushed. There's just no reason to hurry with his central break. It's kind of a theme we're going to see throughout the rest of this game, that Black is just really patient and waits quite a long time before he ever executes a central break. So we get a4, and then knight a5. Again, his plan is just to play knight b3 and reorient the knight to c5, which is a better square for the knight than c6 was. Black has just kind of moved pieces around. Again, b6. He's fixing this a-pawn, which might be a target later on, not allowing any real opportunities for White to try anything. Black has all the time in the world to do more or less whatever he wants, so he has the time to do these kinds of things. White's just going to move his pieces back and forth. So knight b3, knight b2 comes into c5, so he's improved the knight now, and also sort of fixed this knight to defend the a4 square. So now he's really going to be reduced to just making king moves. King e3, g5, just continuing to gain more space. g3, which if we notice g3, now h3 is weak, so Black tries to see if White's going to let him drag his king into this position. And so king f3, holding it out. So g4 plus, or sorry, check. And then after king e3, he has really improved all of his position to the maximum. There's not any piece or pawn that can really be better placed. So now it's time really for Black to start trying to think about some concrete way of going about winning the game. The first plan that he's going to try is just to swing his king over here to a4 and try to win this pawn. Notice that because of he's pushed this pawn to g4, which has taken all this space and takes away the e3 or the f3 square, and this pawn takes away f4, he's now safe to move his king all the way over here and doesn't have to worry about White getting his king in and coming attacking h5. So this idea right here of gaining this space, this is why. Is so that White doesn't have the space to try to go for any counterplay. So he's just going to dance his king over. White just goes back and forth. There's no real way that he can get his king over to a3, and even if he could, he probably shouldn't. If he gets his king to a3, we would probably just see knight e4, knight f3, and goes and captures this pawn. He's going to play knight f1 and capture this pawn, and this king's just way too far away to do anything about it. So king c2, king a6, king d2, king a5. And so it looks like that now Black could just win this pawn, and then maybe kind of snake his king back over and just be happy that he's gained yet another pawn. He decides not to do it, and I pretty certain that the reason why is if he plays knight takes knight, or knight takes pawn, then white is going to play knight to d3, which kind of forces e4, and then he's got this move, knight to f4, and he's going to win this h-pawn. This is probably still going to be a win for excuse me, for black, but it's much more complicated. So black decides that he's not going to go for this, and instead he's just going to bring his king back around. Now note that by having gone on this little adventure with his king over to the queen side, he's lost nothing. He still has the advantage with this passed pawn in the center. There wasn't anything that black was going to be able to do to try to stop that. And so there was no harm in coming over and testing this. Yeah, you never know. White may have misplaced his knight somewhere, just trying to waste time, and it might have found a situation where it was safe to win the pawn. Even so, he chooses not to, and so now he's just going to bring his king back over to the center, and decides now to advance the e4 pawn. Okay, so king d2, bring the king up to f5, king e2, white's still just waiting, doesn't have anything better to do. So knight e6. This does a couple things. It's going to help protect the d4 square. But then he might also be thinking about playing knight to g5 to f3 and then going after this h-pawn again. If the king ends up being tied down over here, then black or white may find the time to play e3, bring the king up, and then infiltrate into white's position with the king. White decides he needs to do something about that, so he plays to c4. His idea is to try to create his own passed pawn. So d4, pushing past. He pushes again, just sacrificing the pawn. And excuse me. And then just pawn takes, which is kind of important. If he takes with a knight, then we get knight takes, or sorry, knight c4 check, and then he's going to pick up this pawn, and he will be defending this and have his knight pretty well positioned to help support this pawn, so this could be a little bit dangerous. Takes with the pawn, plays a5, and after king d5, it's clear that the black king is gonna be able to catch the pawn. He is within the golden square. We just draw this diagonal down to d8 and make a square, and we see the king's inside of it, which means this pawn isn't gonna queen. And so here white gives up all hope and just throws in the towel. Alright, really instructive game. I think that we saw some key middle game plans and some really nice in-game technique as well. I want to go back and sort of review the key moments again right after the IQP position. So we have here, and then dropping back, just keeping that pressure. Queen d3, and we make this exchange. And again, this bishop move, quite a key move as it fights for the d4 square. Brings the rook over, the knight out, again fighting for d4. Queen out, again fighting for d4. Notice how every move that black is making is influencing one of the three key points of this position: f2, d4, and b2. So a bishop brought back makes this instructive exchange here, and then goes after the b2 pawn, still just hammering away at these key points. This exchange, and then this idea to try to stop the pawn with the key sack. Then after this transfer of the knight, really he has a one game at this position. There's just not really anything that black can do at this point. Black is strategically won. There's not much that he can do, and he just went on to win a fine endgame. Anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this game, found it instructive, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.